Speaking next is our second speaker in proposition of the motion, Caitlin Farrell. Caitlin is a first-year student reading English at Peterhouse, and she won the slot through open audition. Caitlin, the floor is yours.
Madam President, thank you very much for this opportunity to speak today at such an illustrious establishment, even if it is from the comfort of my college bedroom, on an issue which is very close to my heart, the wearing of the poppy, and how deeply inappropriate it is for modern remembrance and for truly understanding the horrors and suffering of war. Before I begin, I'd like to explain my own decisions regarding the poppy. 2 years ago, after wearing a white poppy for a year before then, I chose to stop wearing the poppy completely. Firstly, because I feel that the poppy has been taken over by the far right as a symbol of British nationalism, but also because I've come to recognise that the poppy was never an apolitical symbol of remembrance in the first place. And secondly, because my family are Irish, and the more I learn about the atrocities of the British Army in Ireland and in other places, the less able I feel to support it or its actions in any capacity, and that capacity includes the poppy. So, every year, the Royal British Legion makes 36 million poppies at their specialist factory, which are sold around the UK as symbols of remembrance for those who died in war and conflict. But today I wish to argue that the poppy, despite its supposed purpose of encouraging commemoration of war and conflict, has become a symbol of British imperialism and the hyper-nationalist right. And then, instead of encouraging us to think critically about how we remember war and conflict, simply masks the horrors of war by glorifying death and sacrifice. I would also like to look at Britain's culture of remembrance and how it developed away from the realities of war and conflict. And finally, to interrogate how the poppy plays into ideas of glorifying the British Army specifically, and how, therefore, it is not solely an apolitical symbol which benefits a good charitable cause. Now, I don't intend to attack people who do choose to wear a poppy. I don't think that because you wear a poppy, you personally are an imperialist who is willing to overlook the realities of war. But I do want to encourage you to think critically about what the poppy represents in a wider cultural sense, and how that is not neutral, and to remind you that the public rhetoric of sacrifice surrounding warfare elides the extreme cruelty of war, suffering, and in the past, army conscription. First of all, where did the poppy come from? People began to wear small poppies on the 11th of November, Armistice Day, in the years following the First World War, but the custom was small scale, and remembrance ceremonies focused on a 2-minute silence deemed appropriate for a country still grieving and reeling from the shock of a war which changed their lives and killed so many people. However, the custom of both the 2-minute silence and the poppies later lapsed and was only revived in the 1990s, when the majority of people affected by the First World War were dead. This spread to include local services at war memorials and became gradually more and more excessive. I feel this was worsened by the centenary years of the war, 2015 to 2018, when people felt obliged to engage in a performance of public commemoration which became larger and more ostentatious over time and is still with us today. Whilst the purpose of the centenary, of the Remembrance Day commemorations more generally, was to remember the losses of war, the huge national scale of it seemed more like a glorification of warfare and of British national power than a solemn commemoration of lives lost, a sincere discussion of how war still affects people around the world, and a thoughtful assessment of what we can do to stop it instead of perpetuating it, as well as allowing us to forget that we are complicit in warfare, that Britain has been very complicit, including in the First World War, which is not some apolitical, unavoidable tragedy. This centenary also coincided with a drive to improve education about the First World War for children, with school children around the country discussing the war's causes, reading stirring war poetry about the horrors of the trenches, and of course, wearing poppies. A major reason for the support of the poppy is education, and how it helps us to learn about the First World War and subsequent conflicts. But simply wearing the poppy is not enough to educate us about war and its histories, and neither it is a way to stop the poppy being manipulated. So the ostensible meaning of the poppy is remembrance of those who died in the First World War and all subsequent conflicts. Harmless, positive symbol, right? Well, no. When we wear the poppy, what are we actually trying to say? The red poppy is supposed to commemorate all those who died on active service in wars and conflicts. But when all major news about the poppy seems to be whether or not people are wearing it, not what it represents and how it can inform our current understandings of conflict, something has gone wrong. Newsreaders such as Charlene White and Jon Snow have been attacked for choosing not to wear the poppy on screen, with Snow even calling the obsession with performative remembrance poppy fascism, something worth thinking about. Poppies now appear on inanimate objects like buses, tube carriages, street lamps, and even water cooler towers. Yes, really, Drax Power Station in North Yorkshire inexplicably feels that it'll add to national commemorations if a projected image of the poppy appears on a water tower. How does this possibly aid a national culture of remembrance and reflection surrounding the war? What does an excess of symbols actually do to encourage us as Brits to think about the destruction and violence which our country not only suffered from, but was complicit in? This national insistence on newsreaders, politicians, and even football teams wearing the poppy seems a bit ridiculous. Something especially important to consider is that when the England football team came into conflict with FIFA for insisting on wearing poppies in matches during the 2018 World Cup qualifiers, FIFA banned the poppy for being a political symbol. If FIFA can recognise that the poppy is controversial, jingoistic, and politicised, why can't we? The former English Defence League leader and notable violent racist criminal Tommy Robinson wore a poppy to address supporters after his 2018 trial for far-right activity, and also protested FIFA's banning of the poppy in a show of performative outrage, which further cemented the poppy's associations with the right. Another ridiculous and performative thing about the poppy is that it now begins earlier and earlier every year. The Conservative MP for Romford, Andrew Rosendale, a proud jingoist and nationalist who believes all children should be forced to sing God Save the Queen at school, who can forget the infamous interview where he and Piers Morgan ridiculed journalist Ash Sarkar for suggesting that this should not be a political priority, tweeted this year that he had started wearing his poppy on the 17th of October, the first MP in the House to do so, and before the national period of commemoration had even begun. Whilst I don't intend to generalise about what kind of politicians emphasise the poppy as part of our national agenda, and indeed my honourable opponent today is a Labour MP who supports the wearing of the poppy, the fact that the MPs who are most aggressive and vocal about the supposed importance of the poppy are those on the hyper-nationalist right, we should reassess what the poppy means and whether we should really be so proud to wear it. Politicians love using Remembrance Day as a way to gain political capital. Solemnly intoning lest we forget at appropriate parliamentary moments is not meaningful engagement with the concept of remembrance, especially when it's used to push aggressive military policy and right-wing ideology. The poppy has been appropriated as a symbol of the nationalist right in Britain. Twitter accounts which claim to honour our brave boys, whilst encouraging the thought of them being sent off to enact violence on innocent civilians in the Middle East. Jingoist MPs insisting we should wear them earlier and earlier. Need I indeed remind the chamber that Nick Griffin, the former leader of the BNP, wore a poppy all year round? And nationalist supporters of army activity are all loud proponents of wearing the poppy. And whilst I recognise the focus of many on commemoration and on reclaiming the poppy from the far right, is it worth it? Alternative poppies, such as the white poppy for peace, black poppies for non-white service people, and purple poppies for animals who died in warfare, all seem to cause more problems than they solve. The discourse they trigger prompts the supporters of the red poppy to double down on nationalist rhetoric, arguing that red poppies is the support of British soldiers. And even if you wear a red poppy and insist it represents everyone, as well as fighting for peace and an end to war, remember two things first: that the main supporters of the red poppy don't believe this, and second, that all the benefits of the red poppy, social and financial, go to the British Army. The outcry at the alternative poppies just reminds us that for many people, the poppy itself, and the issue of those who died in war, something alternative poppies do also represent, is less important than the patriotic British sentiment. Now, why is this a problem? Well, the army is predominantly a right-wing political concern, and the increased attention on the poppy and the insistence that everyone wear it is a way to lead the British public into implicit support for the army and its actions, and away from the recognition that it's a political institution, and that the things it does are at the behest of specific governments, when really we should be very keen to question those actions and their validity, especially when the money from the poppy appeal goes to helping those in the army. This is especially problematic because it pushes the idea, set by the pomp and circumstance of Remembrance Day parades and services, that fighting and dying in war is glorious and honourable, something we as a country we should be proud of. I find it very difficult to believe in 2020 that fighting in war is inherently honourable, and the popular belief that war is a necessary evil and that those who fight perform a necessary service is difficult to process. There is nothing honourable about killing people, and sometimes I think we're keen to detach ourselves from this as the reality of war, especially when many of the soldiers we celebrate as dying for our freedoms, I'm thinking here of the First World War generation, were conscripted at unbearably young ages and died messy, undignified deaths which served no real purpose. The senseless slaughter of the Somme, of Passchendaele, of Verdun is not something to be glorified through performative remembrance, and certainly not something that we should feed ideas of British exceptionalism or encourage more people to sign up for slaughter and death in the army. And this overuse of the poppy for this purpose is something which has even been criticised by veterans who feel the excessive patriotism is unhelpful and offensive. When we've seen so much cruel and pointless military action in recent years, we need to remember What is glorious about war? What's glorious about Iraq and the suffering its civilians? Why are only British lives worth commemorating? The lives of civilians, especially non-British civilians, which are lost in war, are completely overlooked, especially by the Poppy's narrative, and those who suffer generational trauma and displacement from war are overlooked completely. I don't feel this British nationalism and its imperialist origins are something really to be proud of. How then can we appropriately commemorate Remembrance Day and the huge human cost from all nations of warfare? Remembrance Day is still an important part of our national history, and it's important for us to engage in genuine mourning for the horror and senselessness of war. But what we see at present is an overblown celebration of British warfare and dominance. Let's not forget, part of the reason our remembrance commemorations are so excessive compared to many other countries is because we can distance ourselves from the overarching horrors of death row because we won. And at what cost? We need to remember that for many people at the time, during both the First and Second World Wars, victory was not something to joyfully celebrate, but a moment which encompassed huge pain at the loss and suffering they experienced. The First World War poet Robert Graves writes in his autobiography of spending the 11th of November 1918 alone, cursing, sobbing, and thinking of the dead. Where's the glory in that? What does modern remembrance possibly understand about that? We need a quieter, more introspective, and much more solemn set of commemorations which don't focus on victory and glory, but rather the sadness and pointlessness of loss and the generational trauma war creates, which those who don't understand it are unwilling to acknowledge. If we want to do this, we need to start by retiring the poppy and all its political connotations. With this in mind, then, how can we justify still wearing the poppy? Why are British people so keen to be associated with symbols of imperialism, jingoism, and willingness to forget the things we claim each November 11th to remember? What is wrong with the solemn, quiet, and regretful commemorations of the past, where we truly recognise the horrors of war and the original message of the poppy appeal, which is an end to armed conflict? And finally, for those of you who still wear the poppy, who still support the armed forces, who still believe that it's possible to glorify violence, war, suffering, and death through the grisliness of national pomp and circumstance, allow me to leave you with the immortal words of First World War poet Siegfried Sassoon. You smug-faced crowds with kindling eye, who cheer when soldier lads march by, sneak home and pray you'll never know the hell where youth and laughter go. And for these reasons, I beg you to join us in proposing the motion. Thank you very much, Madam President.